Okay, so now what we're gonna add is you'll notice if you enter an email that's already taken, the form doesn't give you any errors or anything, right? So once you submit the form, of course the database tells you, hey, that username is taken, um, or hey, that email is taken, which is fine. But going forward, this form can get pretty long. So what we want to do is tell the user right away, after they've entered the email or username, that it's already taken, rather than waiting for them to submit the form. So we're going to implement that. The next thing we're also going to implement is a confirm password field, since that's usually seen on most websites. All right. So the first thing we'll want to do is go into our backend, into our app folder, and then routes and API. And what we're going to do is going to create two additional endpoints to check that email and username field, right? And so what we can do is copy the route that we created before, the one for authenticating. Instead of authenticating, what we'll do is we'll just check for a username and then spit out a response. All right, so what I'll do is you're not going to need this entire thing. We're only going to need, matter of fact, just delete this part here. And so what we'll do, instead of username, email, and password, we just need the username, so we can delete that. And we'll say if username is true, then we'll respond with JSON, success will be false, and the message will say that username is already taken. Okay. Else, respond with JSON, success true, message valid username, we'll say, right? Okay, so we can just copy this, and actually I forgot to change the route name. We'll say check username. That's what we'll name the route. So we'll copy that one, and we'll just change everything to email. Check email. Instead of username, we'll say email. Request.body.email. And then here we'll say that email is already taken and valid email. Okay, so now we can go into our controller, our front-end controllers, public app controllers, and into, or I'm sorry, not controllers, but services. Inside of our user services, we'll just create a new service for those two endpoints, right? So you can go ahead and copy the previous one we created and just paste it there. Whoops. We'll name one check username, and we'll name the other one check email, right? Just to keep it self-explanatory. And then make sure you change the route, check username, check email, and then we'll still use the reg data, so that's fine. And so that will look like this. Okay, and this one will look like this. Okay, so go ahead and copy those. We'll be using that in a second. Okay, and now you can go into your controllers and into the user controller, because that's the one that's connected to the registration page. And somewhere at the bottom, we'll say right here, we'll go ahead and at the bottom paste these two, right? So we'll create new functions for the form, right? We'll create one called check username, and we'll start with that one, and then we can just paste that in there. We'll say, of course, we have to change this to app.regdata, and inside here, pass in regdata. We'll say then function, then we'll just log it to the console for now, make sure everything is indeed working. Okay, and I'm just going to comment this out for now. So what we can do is I'm going to copy this, but this is what it's going to look like. Username, reg data. Okay, so I'm just actually going to copy this, and then I'm going to go over to views, pages, users, and then open up the registration page. Okay, and since we're starting with email, we'll start with the email, and inside the input, what we want to do is add in ng blur, right? And what that will do is anytime you click outside of email or tab out or just leave the box, it will execute this function, right? And it's going to be the one we just created, right? And actually, I just realized wrong section. I did username, not email. So let's go ahead and paste it down here, actually. Okay, better. So let's test it out and see if it's working. Go ahead and hit refresh and click into username and then just tab out. And you'll see that it logs the data just like we wanted, right? And of course it's saying valid username because of course a blank username isn't taken. So that's fine. And you'll notice if, let's say I type one that I know to be taken and I tab out, it relogs the data again. And then if you go into data, you'll see that username is already taken, right? So now we can use message and success to manipulate the the feedback that we give back. So let's go ahead and change this to reflect a message. So we'll say if data.data.success, meaning the username is not taken, then we will let's call our message username message data.data.message. Else we'll say app and we'll use the same name. Okay, and then let's make sure we clear it anytime this function is accessed. Okay, and then we'll create another one that says invalid, set it to false. We'll say username invalid. Okay, and so we'll set it to true right here because it is invalid if it's already taken, and then we can put it here if we need it false. Okay, the last thing that I want to do is add a loading variable, kind of like we did up here. Pretty much the same thing is what we're going to do. So we'll just call it checking username. We'll set it to true and then set it to false as soon as we get a response. Okay, and then let's go ahead and copy this and do the same, but with email. We actually don't need this down here. So we'll change this to check email. Checking email. And don't forget to change this, check email. Okay, so now let's go to the front end and implement all of this. So underneath username, we'll say under this paragraph, we'll insert another one. Same class. And that's where we'll put our message. So for username, it's username message is what I created. Okay. And we'll only show that if it's true. So we'll say ng show register user message is true. So let's make sure this is working up to this point before we go on any further. So let's try it out. That username is already taken, and then as soon as you change it and tab out, valid username. Okay, so we got it working. Now we just need to change this so that if it's invalid, of course, we want it to display red with the red box. So that's an easy fix up here in the has success and has error. We just have to add that new condition. So we'll add if register dot check our username invalid, right? So as long as that's not true, and then the opposite for here. say if it is true. And remember, that was the variable that I created right here, right? So success being true, that it is a unique username, then we set it to false. And if it's not true, then we set the username invalid to true. And that's how we manipulate that here, right? So hit save, and let's see if this all works. Hit refresh, type in a valid username. A taken username, and you'll see it's in red, and then as soon as you change it to a unique one, it turns green. That's good. So let's go ahead and do the same thing to email. Right, so we'll just take this, copy it right underneath here, and we'll just change this to email message. And then don't forget to copy the ng blur as well. So go ahead and paste that into the input, change it to check email, and then we just have to add it to the success and error, right? So we'll say and register email invalid. Don't forget to add that exclamation point there, and then we'll add that here. Okay, hit save, and then let's refresh and see what we get. Type in a taken email address, make sure you get red, and then make it unique and make sure you get green. All right. One other thing you'll notice is if you tab out and it's blank, it's telling you valid username, valid email. Now we definitely don't want to display that to the user. So what we can add is make sure that the form is not blank, right? And where you do that is right after the message, you'll say and reg form username error required, right? That's saying is and if it's not displaying the error of being required, right? So we'll just copy all of this and insert it at the top into email, and then we'll just change this to email. So hit save and hit refresh and tab out and see, and now you're seeing it's not displaying that empty error. You actually have to type something in before it'll tell you that, right? Now the other thing is you'll notice it's telling you valid email even though we haven't met the requirements. So that's another issue. We don't want to display that until all these requirements are met, right? So the way we can do that is add another condition. And over in username, we'll start off where it says required. We'll say and register dot username. I'm sorry, not register. Reg form dot username dot valid. Okay, let's do the same for email. We'll say and reg form dot email dot valid. And that's saying don't display this error, this message of whether or not it's valid or not, unless the form is valid itself, right? So let's go ahead and type in incomplete email, and you notice when you tab out, now it's not showing it. You actually have to complete the email address in order to get that message, right? Same thing with username. Tab out, nothing, but then as soon as you type in a valid one, you get that message there. So one last thing that I want to do is you'll notice in the controller I created that checking email and checking username. The reason for that is because I want to add, if you go to the Bootstrap website and go to components, I want to add a little loading icon, right? You can create really cool ones with CSS, but we're just going to steal this Bootstrap one, so we'll copy that and we'll insert it in right before the paragraphs that display the error message, which is right up here. So right here we can create a span, we'll say, and we'll make the class there, and we'll only show it if this variable is true, right? The ones we created, checking email and checking username. All right, so we'll say ng show register dot checking username. So let's copy that and use the same one up here. Then we'll just change it to checking email. All right, hit save and then give it a refresh, and you won't really be able to see it because my connection is pretty fast, so it doesn't show. But on some of the slower connections, you'll see the little loading icon there. So, and then depending on the size of your database as well, it may take a little bit longer, and then you'll really see that icon come out. But anyway, we're ready to move on to the confirm password field. So the first thing that we want to do is go down to the bottom at the end of your form and just create 2 inputs to practice on. Right, so we'll say input text. We won't make it password yet, and we'll just name this one first password. And then create 2 breaks here. And another input, and I'm going to name, whoops, that's not right. I'm going to name this one confirm password. Okay. So nothing really to see here, just 2 fields that I'm going to practice on. And so the next thing we'll have to do is create a custom directive in Angular. If you just search custom directive in Angular, you get this website. And there's a lot of different examples. This to me is the best one right here. You can just copy that and place it in the controller anywhere. But we'll just place it here at the bottom. We'll say right here. Okay. And then let me fix this up really quick. Their code is all jacked up. Now, we don't need this template URL. We can name the directive whatever we want to. We'll name it match, just because that's what makes sense. Now, this restrict box, if you go back to the Angular website, it explains to you what this is. And basically, each letter represents what you want to restrict it to, right? Like, say, attribute or the element or the class, whatever. And we'll just use attribute. And that's going to be the easiest in this situation. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the controller to set a function. And we'll have to use scope in order to access the front end. That's how we data bind in Angular. So we'll create a function. We'll say do confirm. Oops. And then we'll log a test first, right? And so what we'll do is right at the end bracket, right, the one that ends controller, we'll say comma link. We'll do the same thing in another function, except this function is going to take in scope, element, and attributes. Okay. And so what we can do is we can type in attributes.observe, and we can observe the match attribute, and then do the function that we created above. So we'll say do confirm. We'll type in test for right now. Okay. And in order for this to get passed into the function, we have to create a variable. We'll name it values and then pass that into log. Go ahead and go back to the register form. And so now what we have to do is grab this. Of course, we created the attribute match, so now we have to pass that. So we'll in the second input we'll pass in match, and we'll just set it to something like Harry Potter, right? Okay, so go ahead and hit save on that and go back to the controller. And I actually want to fix this up a little bit before we go on. Actually, I just realized this is in the wrong spot. You want to actually do it after the parentheses. Okay, so once that's done, go ahead and hit save and hit refresh. And you notice it's logging the test now, right? So now what we can do is we can grab this, whatever we're trying to match, we can grab it now. Right, and the way we do that is we change this test to attribute.match. And if you hit refresh, you'll notice now it's actually logging what we had in the attribute, right? Okay, so how do we log this input, right? We want to grab this first input in order to compare, right? Well, the way we do that, we have to add an ng model, and we'll just name the ng model the same thing, first password. Okay. And then right here in the match, we can say match first password. And the way you do that is with 2 brackets and then the array, right? So 2 inner brackets and then the array box, right? So go ahead and hit save on that, then hit refresh on your page, and you'll notice there's a new box that says null. Now, if you click on the first input, anytime you type in a letter, you'll notice it starts to add it in there into the array, right? That's because inside the controller we're saying match the first password. So therefore first password is being logged every single time here because we're observing it, right? And so now what we have to do is grab the second input and match that to the first. So same thing, we have to add an ng model. So we'll name this one confirm, right? And so the next thing that we have to do is below this one, we'll say scope.watch. We'll name it confirm. And then we'll just do the exact same thing. Let's copy this. Oops. Go ahead and hit save and then hit refresh. Now you'll notice that if you type in the first box, right, that's fine. But then the second one, nothing's coming out, right? Like it's just saying null. It's only logging this first one. The reason for that is we have to add another console log here. So we'll say console log scope.confirm, right? That's the new ng model that we created. So now if you hit refresh, you notice it says undefined now, but once you type in something, like say type in something here, and then in the other one we'll put, I don't know, Harry. Now you'll notice anytime I type in the second box, it's also updating it here, but it's logging both every time. The reason for that is because we want to check both. Every time the user types in a character, we want to compare these two. We don't just want to do it once. Okay, we want to do it every single time. That way we can tell the user if the password is valid at all times, right? That way, if let's say they type in the same password, right, like this, well, if the user goes back and changes this, we want to log that it's no longer valid, it's no longer matching, and that's how we do that, right? So the next thing that we want to do is we can get rid of these console logs, and what we'll do is we'll say we'll create a loop here. So we'll say values.forEach, okay, and then we'll pass in a function, and for this one we'll log, we just have to create a variable. We can use anything, we'll just name it ELE, right? Doesn't really matter. Okay, now if you hit save and then you hit refresh now, you'll notice you get this for each is not a function. The reason for that is because now that we're using this as a loop and it's coming in the form of an array, what we have to do now is parse this data. It's the only way it's going to work. So the way you do that is you type in json.parse, and then you take this, you take the attribute, and then you pass it into the parse, right? Now what we can do is we can save it into a whole new variable. So we'll just name it matches, right? We'll say scope.matches, and then we can take scope matches and then log that instead, right? So you can just copy this and paste it over the bottom one, right? Because we're doing the exact same thing for both. Okay. All right, and then at the top here, go ahead and log that scope confirm, because remember that's how you get the second input. Hit save on that and then hit refresh. And now you notice we're getting the two. We're getting null and undefined. So in the first one, we can type something in. Second one, okay, just like before, right? Anytime we change it, it's constantly looping through, right? And so what we can do now that we have both of these in one loop, and the reason for putting in that loop is so that we perform this function every single time it changes. And so what we can do is we can say, we'll say if scope.confirm is equal to ELE, then else. Okay, now what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new variable that lets us know whether or not they match, right? You can actually delete these two consoles. So you can create this variable up here, and we'll name it something practical, confirmed, and we'll set it to false by default, right? The reason I had to put that scope in there is that's how we access it on the front end, right, on the HTML page. And so what we'll do is, if it matches, if it's equal to ELE, right? In other words, if the second input is equal to the second one, then we'll set this to true, right? Else we'll set it to false, right? Because it can change, it can hop back and forth every time a user presses a key, right? And so now what we can do is we can use this on the front end to create a message. So go back to the register, and right below the second input, we'll just put in a paragraph that says passwords do not match. We'll change this to ng-show if confirmed is false. Right, so hit refresh and type in something here. As soon as you press that key, passwords do not match, right? And as soon as you type in the exact word, there it goes, passwords now match. So we're good to go. So now what we can do is plug this into this password field. So the first thing that we want to do is copy this div up here, the one for password, because we're going to use that same one for the confirm password. Right. But instead, whoops, we'll name it confirm password. And we don't need this here. And we're also not going to be checking for all these, the ng pattern and length. It doesn't matter. Okay, because it doesn't matter because the only criteria we're checking in the second input is whether or not it matches. Okay, that's all we care about. And then we'll add that paragraph below. Okay, and we'll use the same class help block. We'll say ng-show not confirmed. Okay, and we'll say passwords do not match. Okay, and then let's go ahead and delete all this. We don't need that. Okay, so when do we want success? Well, if it's confirmed and it doesn't have the error of being required. In other words, like when the page first loads, both fields are going to be blank, both password inputs. So at that point, it is confirmed they do match. So that's why we also want to put in, make sure that reg form second password is not blank. And actually, I forgot to change the name here. We'll name this one to confirm password. We'll say confirm password pristine, and we'll put that exclamation point there, right? So you can only have success if they match and it is not untouched. And actually, I meant to put error here, required, right? As long as you don't have that error of it being required. Okay. So, and then for error, we can go ahead and delete all of this. And what we can do is just copy this and just kind of use the opposite of what it is, right? So now what we can do is change this ng model to what we used below, which was confirm. Okay. And then for the first password, we have to change the ng model to first password, right? Because that's what we wanted to use. And then in the second input, what we can do is say, make just like below, we'll say match first password. Oops, don't forget the array brackets. Okay, now, of course, that deleted the ng model that we need. So what we'll have to do is, what we can do is use ng change, and we'll say change this ng model to confirm, assign it confirm. In other words, if we don't do this, right, if we don't add this ng change, what happens is when we submit the form, it's not going to detect the ng model of password because it no longer exists. I deleted it. So what we can do with ng change is whatever is in the confirm box, assign that to the ng model of reg data password, and that's what will get passed to the database. Okay. So let's go below and delete all of these inputs. We don't need them anymore. Okay, and so we don't want to display this. We do want to display it if it's not confirmed, but we also want to make sure the user has had a chance to at least modify the field. So we'll say reg form dot confirm password pristine, and then we'll add that exclamation point there, right? Oops. And then we also we don't want to display this if the user hasn't even gotten past this input, right? And the way we do that is we want to say and reg form password, first password is valid, right? So they have to have this completed before this will display. Additionally, in the has error portion, let's put this into parentheses. And then we also want to give them an error if the form is missing. So we'll say if regform.confirm password error of required and regform confirm password is not pristine. Okay, hit save on that. And actually, I forget, this is actually or, not and up here. The last thing is we want to make sure we change this name to first password, right? Otherwise, all the validations are not going to work. And we'll do the same up here. We'll change this first password. Oops. Same here. And then also we want to just notice I haven't changed this here to confirm password. So just change this to confirm password. And that's the paragraph that gives you that this field is required. So hit save on that and let's see what we get. Okay, hit refresh and let's type in a password. Now, the first thing I want you to make sure is it should not be giving you a does not match message here if this password isn't valid. So as you see, you're not getting the does not match yet because this password has to be valid. So, and you'll see that as soon as you type in a valid password, now you get the password does not match. And then as soon as you match it, there you go. Now, anytime if you type in, like let's say I type in something up here, there you go, you get the password does not match again. And then if you delete the entire password, it goes away because this has to be valid first, right? And then now we're getting this field is required, right? The last thing to test for is go ahead and hit refresh and hit submit. Want to make sure that you're getting that this field is required upon submit. We are, but it's not coming in red. That's because we forgot to add it to the has error box, right? So what we can do is we can say or regform, can't spell today, is submitted, and regform dot confirm password error dot required, right? So hit save on that and then hit refresh and let's see if it turns in red. Now there you go. Now we're good to go.